Cool. So thanks, Amanda, for joining us at Sales Brew. I wanted maybe you can start telling us how did you get into revenue operations?
Yeah, sure. So I started off about 6 years ago at a startup that sold 3D printers, and I was their office manager, and I happened to report to their VP of business operations since it was a small company. So the VP of business operations owned sales ops, rev ops, marketing ops, and just through networking and learning more about what their team did, I took an interest in sales operations. So I wanted to get our on-site customer meeting process built out in our Salesforce platform. So I built a custom object and learned kind of by doing in a Salesforce sandbox how all of the different objects are interconnected, and we were able to track the impact of customer meetings that were on site at our main facility on our sales opportunities. So that was really cool. That was kind of my first big project. And then from there, it's kind of grown in the sales operations role. I've worked at larger companies as well as just smaller startups, but I really found my home kind of in the smaller early stage startup world because I really enjoy building out processes and systems from scratch and bringing order to the chaos.
Sounds cool. So I think your journey is a bit different than other people. And a lot of revenue operations people start with maybe in sales, maybe frontline first, and you skip this part. So I'm curious to know what make you go into operations before trying sales? What was your passion about it?
Yeah, so I think all my life I've been a very operationally minded person. And I went to school and I was actually a theater major and I did stage management, which is essentially the project manager of a production. I ended up not wanting to go into theater, but I got kind of an office manager role with the intention to really figure out what I wanted to do and learn more about different areas of a business. And for me, operations was the most natural fit. It involves a lot of project management, bringing people together, making sure that all teams are collaborating cross-functionally. And it really was like the pieces of stage management that I enjoyed when I did that as a theater major. It also brought out like kind of the most fun things I enjoyed as an office manager, which were like more around creating office processes from a high level. But I got really into the systems thing and it just felt like a natural fit. Personally, I didn't really want to be the frontline person selling and like responsible for quota, but I really enjoyed like enabling sellers to be as efficient as possible and to make the most of the systems that they use.
Sounds good. I hear you, even though I do sell from time to time. Okay, let's dive a bit about data and CRM. What are your number one challenge when it comes to CRM data quality?
I think the biggest challenge is figuring out the best way to capture data and reduce manual human entry whenever possible. Reps don't have a lot of time to be caught up in just the administrivia of things in Salesforce. And the needs are always changing from leadership of what types of data points they want to look at and what they want to capture. So anything that can be automated or sit on top of the CRM to capture rep activity, to me, is the most important thing to establish early on at an organization so that your data is clean and seamless and coming from a reliable source. I think it's easy for reps, if we just rely on manual entry, to maybe forget something or miss something. And you can manage that to a degree by doing exception reporting and by coaching and building out process docs. But the fewer processes you have with the most efficient steps, the easier it is for your team to focus on selling and to be able to touch and interact with more customers. So I'm always coming at problems around data hygiene from that mindset. So sometimes we may need to have manual entry. There's no way around it. So how do we make it intuitive and easy to enter that information as a deal gets progressed? And how can we like kind of naturally incentivize salespeople to enter that data? Is it the data that they're entering impactful to their KPIs or their sales, so that we know that they kind of have a vested interest in making sure that the information that they do need to enter is correct? So that's kind of the mindset and approach that I take when I'm thinking about CRM data.
So it sounds good in theory. Can you maybe provide us with one practical example on, let's say, how you incentivize reps updates to CRM?
Sure. So for one thing, like BDRs, event outcomes, are very crucial. It's not always easy to get a clear outcome of the event unless somebody enters what happened. We can see that based on the handoff. We can see that based on like the essays, notes, or moving an opportunity stage. But the outcome is really critical, and ultimately often how the BDRs get paid. So they are very much working with their counterparts, their account executives, to make sure that the meetings are just positioned appropriately, whether or not it was a no-show, because ultimately their goal is to book meetings and have people show up to them. So it's important to them to really get that right. And it's also probably the next natural question is, how do you make sure that they're not like putting in phony meeting outcomes? Well, how are they supposed to get their like bonus kickback if the deal doesn't close? So ultimately they do want to like put in whether or not the meeting showed or not, because if not, it's somebody they can continue prospecting into and continue working with the account executive to ultimately close a deal. So everybody's interests are aligned around closing the deal. So meeting outcome data is generally reliable. Now, operations still probably needs to have practices in place to double check and make sure that mistakes aren't being made. And usually you can do that with like exception reporting and seeing like, is there something that's blank, or is there a positive outcome of a meeting on an opportunity stage that maybe hasn't advanced? And then you can kind of dig into the one-off cases, but most of the time you're catching the correct information. So that's one example that I can think of.
Well, I'm curious to know, maybe when you're coming fresh to the organization with the sales operations hat, what was the first steps you took into optimizing your CRM in terms of hygiene?
And I started around the same time as our marketing automation manager as well. I think it's super important for sales and marketing to be working together seamlessly. So I immediately have spent so much time with the marketing automation manager and the marketing team to make sure that end to end, everything is being tracked the way we want it to. We're both new. They haven't really had operations people because it's an early stage startup. They're Series A, so we're the first revenue operations hires. So what we're trying to do right now is to get an understanding of the historical state of the CRM, the current state of the CRM, and what we want the future to look like. So right now we're going through a process of auditing all of the major objects in Salesforce, all of the fields that we have, really doing a health check with our partners at Salesforce and our consultants that support us, to just see where are we at today and what needs to be cleaned up and what permissions need to be in place. Because often at an early stage startup, you don't need to have a ton of auditing information right away. There's more flexibility, things are a little bit more relaxed, but now we're really focused on putting like that rigor into place, really streamlining our processes and identifying gaps. So in these first 30 days, it's really been about like gap analysis. And now we're kind of moving into the execution and cleanup phase where we've identified gaps in our CRM, working on like the common things that you see at startups like deduping and how we're going to manage duplicates on an ongoing basis, setting up appropriate account hierarchies, which depending on the industry is more or less important. But for us in manufacturing, we're very focused on making sure that we have accurate data around the different customer sites underneath a parent company. So that's something that we're working on building out as well. But really it's that, I think that end-to-end audit piece is super important, especially if you're the first operations hire at an early stage startup, because you need to understand what the changes that you're looking to make and how they impact the rest of the organization and how they impact the frontline sellers, and just really get a sense of why things are the way they are, because there's always a reason. Maybe if it's not like to an ops person, maybe not the most intuitive way to manage something, there's a reason that it was put in place that way. So really getting to like the crux of the issue, the reasons why, so that we can use that information to inform better decision making.
Sounds good and sounds exciting. So congrats on the new role.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So last question is, how do you like your coffee?
How do I like my coffee? Ooh, I love lattes. So I actually have my own espresso machine, and it's kind of like a hobby of mine to be a coffee snob and to like find, you know, locally sourced coffee and ethically traded coffee and find like the best tasting coffee beans. And I like to get them whole bean and I like to grind them myself. I like to do the whole espresso machine, like steam my milk, but probably vanilla oat milk lattes are my favorite.
Cool. So barista is the company for you, CRM, data hygiene, and coffee.
Definitely. Those are my favorite things. Coffee and CRM data hygiene on the love list. That's perfect.
Cool. So thanks, Amanda. It was great. And I look forward to share it with our audience.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to